So EdTech, let me kick it off. So the sector itself has been, as you probably know, a laggard in using technology historically. Like, there's always that famous picture of like the manufacturing floor of 100 years ago, and then the current one, or the operating room 100 years ago and the current one, and then you have a photo of the 100-year ago classroom, and it looks exactly like today's classroom. So it has been a laggard, but within the last, I would even say 5 years, education has really started to adopt technology and become technology enabled. And as you know, during the pandemic, everybody became a digital learning provider. So if you were a physical school or a physical plant, you had to become digital because no one was allowed to come to your physical location. So that has been a real accelerant to the education sector and the adoption of technology, and just a bunch of new companies that are continuing to accelerate, because once people got used to it, they said, oh, this is easy, we can do this. And there's been better and better experiences, because if you recall, most of the schools just kind of all of a sudden had to change next week, and they just did what was called Zoom school, where they did the same lecture-based classroom thing, and they just put it on Zoom and did it when you were at home, and it was like remote learning. And that is not an ideal form of tech-enabled learning. There's much better formats for tech-enabled learning. And I think parents kind of saw, well, geez, that form of schooling isn't that good in the physical classroom. It's really not good on Zoom school. But they were able to find a lot of other types of formats, and there's one company in particular by the name of Outschool, which does interest-based learning. So if your kid's interested in potentially launching a YouTube channel, they can take a class on Outschool, learn how to launch a YouTube channel. They can become a TikTok influencer, and there's a class on how do you become a stronger and stronger TikTok influencer. How do you hack robots? How do you create your own video games? So a lot of interest-based stuff. They went from 0 probably 3+ years ago, and went over to 100 million, largely accelerating during the pandemic. And I think the U.S. families are spending a much bigger percentage of their budgets on education now. It used to be that U.S. compared to China and Southeast Asia was pretty small, but now the U.S. is the percentage of the budget of their family budget that they spend on education has been an order of magnitude bigger than it was before the pandemic, and it continues to do that. So they haven't dropped back now that their kids are back in physical school. They've continued to do this kind of engaging interest-based learning. So there's a lot of trends in the education space, and again, I'll just mention a couple of them. From a K-12 perspective, usually I live in Fairfield County, Connecticut, pretty wealthy county in the U.S. I pretty much have two options. I can send my kids to public schools, or I can send them traditional private school. And that's all there pretty much is, as far as if I'm going to give them to a full-size school. But now there's these thing called micro schools, and everyone knows Elon Musk. What you might not know is that he started his own micro school called Ad Astra, and he originally said, there's no way I'm sending my kids to traditional school, because I think that's a crummy experiences. And he's got enough money to do whatever he wants, so he created a school for his own kids, and then he offered that up to everybody at SpaceX, and that micro school is called Ad Astra. And basically what they do is kids get to decide what they want to get better at. And a lot of the kids are, kids of rocket engineers and stuff, so they want to build rockets. And so kids, say, well, okay, well, what do I need to do to build a rocket? And if you guys all remember, I'm an old man, SD rockets, you could build those when you were a kid. There's all sorts of cool versions of those now, and there's drones, and there's all sorts of really cool things you can do with aeronautics for kids. And kids would, jump into these projects, and then they embed, kind of adult curriculum that we care about: reading, write, arithmetic, creative thinking, critical thinking, practical problem solving. They embed that along projects that kids really care about and that kids are engaged in, so they want to pull the education through. We're not just pushing it down their throats like we are in traditional K-12, where kids have no idea why they need to learn that. It's just adults tell us we have to, and if we don't go to school, it's compulsory school, because you go to jail if you don't go to school. So there's just a totally different form of education coming down the pike. And this, what we call pull model of education, is really, we're at the very beginning of that. Because again, we've got K-12 traditional schools that fed the industrial age very effectively. We used to have an illiterate society, and now we have over 90% literacy rates. So the traditional school was fantastic for educating people for the industrial age, but it was necessary but not nearly sufficient now to get people prepared for the innovation age. And we really need to reinvent what we think of as education, because we're all used to the schooling model, and we think, oh, well, that's what there is. But no, there's a lot of different ways to learn, and if you think about your adult world with all the different roles and responsibilities and all the different domains and fields of expertise, and getting good at something in the real world, you probably wouldn't design a school to get good at something in the real world, right? You get good at test taking and listening to lectures, regurgitating on multiple choice tests, and that's not a skill set that we really need in the real world. It's a skill set we had to play that game to get opportunities, and we all in this room probably played that game pretty well, but it's not a game that gets you future ready and gets you ready for the innovation age. So the education sector in particular is at a very early stages of, I would say, a radical historic transformation to very different models of education. And most of where that innovation is happening is it's happening in the pockets around the institutions. So K-12 schools, they have the DNA of a K-12 school, and you can try to reform them as much as you want, and there has been some successful reforms, but in general, they've got a DNA and an operating system that just isn't going to change. So most of the change is coming from the outside in, from the fringes in the B2C markets, like that Outschool example I told you. That's just a consumer model where you sell right to the parents. And then some innovation in the schools. Everyone's heard of charter schools. There's now a movement where these micro schools can show up as online charters, and they have local pods. So it's kind of like cloud-based school, but yet it will have a pod of kids in the same geographic area. They might meet more like at an Airbnb model where they show up at some power parent's home who's helping facilitate and stuff. But basically they have the curriculum being driven, that Ad Astra curriculum I described, being delivered on the cloud with local manifestations and a local affinity groups of different kids working together on different projects. So again, it's happening on the fringes of the big institutional models, and eventually it'll take a bit of time, but I think you're going to see a brand new kind of 21st century model of education, which looks very different than the industrial model of education. So that was my quick overview, Mark, and I don't know if you got the rest of the guys up and running, but I'm happy to have a panel discussion and talk about different specific opportunities. Okay, good. Now he's ready to come up. So super. Here's.
All right, I'm Alan Olson. I'm out of Silicon Valley, and one of the things I was involved with, the founder of Udacity, which was one of the first models for education doing the micro degrees. Udacity spawned from the individual Sebastian Troon, who was the founder of, part of his master's thesis at Stanford was a self-driving car. And so he went on to Google and was with Google X and was a Stanford professor there. And he opened up an online class at Stanford. He had something like 350,000 kids attending his class by Zoom, before Zoom was there. And Stanford says, we're only going to give the 40 kids that are enrolled at our school credit, but Sebastian realized there was a huge market out there. And so he went out to start this company called Udacity. And Udacity now has reached over $1 billion valuation, has taken on about $238 million of funding, and they offer all sorts of nano degrees or micro degrees. It first started in robotics. They aligned with Georgia Tech, and they did, rather than go to the traditional program of getting college degrees and getting a balance of humanity and writing in English, they just said, we're going to do competency degrees. And Udacity guaranteed that if they passed the program, they would guarantee them employment or give all their money back. And so they've gone on to continue to expand the program. And this spring, they put another program in called Micro Degrees, and this is in the area of cybersecurity. And I kind of have to tell how this thing has evolved. There are 4 nanogrees that they put in: cybersecurity, security engineering, security analysis, and the ethical hacker, which I thought that was kind of interesting. So they continue to expand, and again, it's disrupting the education model, or I should say transforming the education model from what it has been traditionally. And I would not be surprised if we begin to see some IPOs in this area. Here's some things in the wind taking on that much money. But I believe that we're going to see some great things in the future. Also, one of the other things that I've personally been involved with is putting in learning centers. I helped to do seed stage for a philanthropy project of bringing people that had dropped out of high school back into the college program. And we have scaled that now to 1,800 sites around the world, and it's been very successful, tens of thousands of kids coming in. And then the third thing that we're putting in, this is exciting, just following up on your comments about with the advancement of technology for programs, we're now able to give kids who would have really never had opportunity for college education the opportunity through use of technology. And a learning center that we just involved, and I'm a trustee for a liberal arts college here on the East Coast, but some of our first kids in the learning center are 3 blind triplets that we're now putting through and giving a college education. The school could not afford the resources, but through the advent of technology, more and more kids are available for this. So.
And to the point of Udacity, over $1 billion valuation, there's a lot of unicorns in EdTech now, and there used to not be. Like if you think about the EdTech space, it used to be Pearson, McGraw-Hill, kind of the old Scholastic, old textbook publishing folks. And they would pay, some paltry of, multiple of EBITDA as opposed to multiples of revenue, right? And so there wasn't a really good kind of M&A market for EdTech. And now you've got a ton of players that have already gone IPO. You've got Pluralsight, which is in tech education. You've got Coursera, which is, I think, $5 billion. You've got, I think, Guild is now $5 billion IPO. You've got Udemy, which is another kind of B2C, kind of learn anything you want, Excel files, tantric this and tantric that. They got everything you want to learn, and it's kind of like online education for the price of a book. And so there are now a lot of players that have real currency to do M&A work with. So as far as the investment area, EdTech not only is no longer a laggard, it now has that whole tier of players that are new tech players that can pay 10 times revenue or more on whatever their multiple is that they're buying your revenues for. So it's a really great market. Not only we have a real good liquidity with IPOs going on, and again, there's been more IPOs in the last 2 years than there were in the 20 previous to that. So it's a really active area, and now those companies like Pluralsight, they're doing like 10 acquisitions a year. So again, it's becoming a very lucrative and liquid market, and a lot of good exits, and VCs are much better than when you could sell your company to Pearson and that was all you could do. So it's financially it's fantastic. And to the other point of Udacity, that's a great example of a company that's not doing schooling, like they don't lecture you and then you regurgitate what concepts they gave you on a multiple choice test. You're doing practical stuff. So Udacity was really known for kind of taking tech skills and kind of cutting edge tech skills like driverless cars, AI, machine learning, and giving you hands-on projects with real-world practitioners that knew what the heck they were doing, and you'd like get scaffolded by these real experts and practitioners from the field so that you walked away with a real competence and a real skill set, not just that you just memorized some facts. So that's a really good example of the new type of kind of innovation age schooling that's coming down the pike, and Udacity is a fantastic example of that. Coursera started at the same time as Udacity to another Stanford professor who I think was, who did the machine learning class with Sebastian Thorne. And they went a totally different route, and they just kind of automated the old school, right? So they basically made it accessible to everyone. So you'd take an MIT course. edX is another one that was MIT and Harvard were involved with. And you would take the MIT course and you just videotape the lectures from the professor, but you make it accessible to everybody, which was fantastic because it made MIT courses all over the place. But unless you were an autodidact in India or somewhere in Southeast Asia, they would get people that would really take it seriously and graduate with, the equivalent of an MIT degree. But in general, 1% of the kids would do that, and they only had a 5% completion rate, and 95% of the people started but never even finished the course and stuff. So Udacity, I think, is a much more interesting model than the Coursera model. But Coursera is evolving, obviously, but Udacity kind of moved to that model very quickly.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.